All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. A lot of news to get to today, of course, as the Cowboys prepare for their Sunday afternoon matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles right around the corner. But we're going to take a deeper look into a really smart job the Cowboys have done, a really good job that's not getting enough attention in the media that I think is really important to break down. But first, let's get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will, as we always like to on this channel. And I'm going to pull up this graphic I created, this chart I created a while back, and it just sort of breaks down what a draft pick represents, right? And this is how NFL teams view draft picks. And this is sort of a simplistic kind of way to look at it, but it's basically how it works. So a draft pick is just realistically just a percent chance to get a good player. And now we're not talking like an all-pro player, but a percent chance to get a solid, good, quality starter. So a first-round pick generally represents, on average, a 50% chance of getting that good solid player, 50% chance of a hit on that draft pick. Now, obviously, if you're the number 5 overall pick versus the number 25 overall pick, right, there's going to be a probabilistic change between those two selections. But on average, it comes out to be roughly 50%, just to simplify things. A second rounder has roughly a 33% chance, 1 in 3. A third rounder, 1 in 4, 25% chance. A fourth rounder, 1 in 5, 20% chance, and so on. You can see the decay on the graphic right there, which logically makes sense. The later you select in the draft, the lower quality, theoretically, the player, the lower chance that he's going to be a hit, a good solid player. And this is what draft picks represent. And this time of year, and really the entire NFL calendar year, people seem to view draft picks in the media as sort of just the gold mine of, oh my goodness, you need to accumulate draft capital. Draft capital is king. Whereas draft capital is really, when you look at it from a team's perspective, they're just a chance to get a good player on the cheap. That's all it is. Right? That's all it comes down to. Because of the current collective bargaining agreement, rookie contracts are much, much, much less than veteran contracts are actually controlled, or, in terms of how much you can pay rookies. So basically a draft pick is just a percent chance of getting a good, cheap player. That's all it is, right? And a lot of people, especially in the media, especially the talking heads, they view first round picks, second round picks especially, as just automatic hits. And that just isn't the case. And then let's talk about what the Cowboys have done recently, of course, with their big trade with Quinton Williams, and a lot of people who didn't like the trade, and a lot of people wondering why they gave up so much for the Jets defensive tackle, former Jets defensive tackle. So I posted this on the show's X account, and I think it's important to talk about. So first-round picks are grossly overvalued. For example, look at the average sacks and tackles for loss for 2025 first-round defensive ends. 1.6 sacks, 2.4 tackles for loss. Again, that's averaging out among the first-round picks. We're talking Abdul Carter, Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., Shamar Stewart. The volume just isn't there in terms of raw production yet. There's going to be good players for sure. Michael Williams is another one. So there's going to be really good players, and I think some of those guys are really good. I think Abdul Carter is going to be a good player, for example. But the reality is their immediate impact just isn't there. It just isn't there for a first-rounder. I went on to write, first rounders are valuable because they are cheap. That's why you need a balance between rookies and good vets. That's what makes the Quinton Williams trade so smart. The ideal team is a mix of talented, experienced vets and cheap, high-quality rookies. Going all in one direction just doesn't work. And this is why the Quinton Williams trade that the Cowboys pulled off, I think, was really smart, and it outsmarted, I think, pretty much everybody. Because a lot of teams, they go one way or the other, right? They look at their situation, they say, you know what, we need to go all in. So we're going to trade away a lot of draft capital to get veterans. That just doesn't work out. It worked out one time in NFL history, and that was the Los Angeles Rams, and that's because they completely exploited a market opportunity. Everyone was overvaluing draft picks. The Rams and Les Snead said, listen, right now the value is so much on the draft capital side, we can get a lot more in return. But they immediately flipped the script. They did that once and never did that again, right? They're full on a draft pick accumulating team now, like a normal roster. So again, they did that once just to take advantage of market inefficiency. That's not a long-term strategy. There are other teams that accumulate draft picks and just hold on to them forever, right? The Miami Dolphins did that for a long time. The New York Jets have done that a bunch of times, and it's never worked out. You need what's called a barbell approach, right? Anyone who's familiar with investing knows you need a barbell approach. You have basically one side of your investments over here, you got the other side over here. You got more risky, you got safe, right? You got to have a split barbell. You can't be fully 100% risky or 100% safe, right? You'll cap your potential returns if you go one way or the other completely. And that's what a lot of teams do when it comes to building a team. They either try and accumulate as much draft capital as possible, or or they try and get rid of all their draft capital and bring in a lot of veterans. The reality is you need both. And that's what the Cowboys were really trying to do here with the Quinton Williams trade, and it worked out tremendously, at least up to this point, certainly on paper. Because they still have their 2 first-round draft picks, right? That's 2 50% chances of getting a good, solid player, right? Assuming they hold on to both, which we'll have to see what they do long-term with those picks. But they also got a really good player today in Quinton Williams, and of course Kenny Clark, who's just a very solid player in his own right. So if you look at my opening graphic there, when I talk about a hit, a good solid player, Quinton Williams and Kenny Clark are obviously hit players, and now they got 2 50% chances to get another hit player, and they surrendered a 33% chance, one of the second-round picks, as part of the Quinton Williams trade. And this is really smart, guys. And a lot of people, when they look at the Cowboys trades, they first denigrated the Micah Parsons deal because they're saying, listen, those first-round picks, there's no guarantee you're going to get another Micah Parsons. That's what everybody said, right? And then after they traded for Quinton Williams, like, well, why would you give up all that draft capital for Quinton Williams that you just gave up, or that you just got for trading away Micah Parsons? It doesn't make any sense. The reality is the Cowboys have done a great job with a barbell approach, right? They had a veteran expensive player, one extreme of the barbell in Parsons, right? They flipped that for a good solid player and 2 more first-round picks, but that was a little too much to the other end of the coin. So they turned some more of that draft capital into another good solid player, a star in my opinion, in Quinton Williams. So now they have that perfect barbell. They got the extra draft capital, which is good. It's what you need. You need a good balance of rookies. They have their own first-round picks, and obviously they picked up 2 more from Green Bay. We obviously know they sent one of the first rounders to the New York Jets. Obviously, that's going to depend on who has a worse record when it comes time for that draft selection. But of the 4 first round picks they have, one of them is now going to the New York Jets. They now have the good amount of draft capital. They now have the good veteran talent with Quinton Williams and Kenny Clark. Perfect barbell, guys. That's what good team building is. You want to have a good mix of veteran and first round picks. And really draft capital in general. Look at the Los Angeles Rams, right now the best team in the NFL in my opinion. They've got 2 first-round picks in the upcoming NFL draft, a lot of draft capital, and a lot of really good, talented veterans. They're a team that acquired Devontae Adams, right? They're a team that added a guy at the end of his career, a good quality receiver, but far from his prime. They've got a lot of veterans they've added to the team and held on. But they were also acquiring draft capital. Again, it's the barbell approach. The Patriots did this for so many years during the Patriots dynasty, especially in the first half of the New England Patriots dynasty. You have got to have that barbell approach. You've got to not be all in on the draft picks, but you can't be all in on the veterans. You got to be both. And this is the first time, I think, in decades I've seen the Cowboys implement that strategy. Most of the time they've been, at least for a lot of Jerry Jones's tenure, at least in the 21st century, they've been a very heavily veteran-laden team, right? We want to go in and get the veterans, right? They would make a trade for Roy Williams and those kind of deals, right? They wanted to bring in the veterans. They wanted to, push all in. And then after the Brandon Card deal, they went the other way because they're like, listen, the veterans aren't working out, right? We paid too much money, that didn't work out. All right, let's go all in on the draft capital. The problem is neither of those approaches work. You need to have that barbell, and that's what the Cowboys right now have done. Very few teams do that. It sounds so obvious and it sounds simple, right? Logically, it makes sense. You want a good mix of rookies and veterans. I mean, that seems to be the logical way to build a team. But most franchises simply don't do it. I think there's a lot of external pressure. If you feel like you need to win now, you go all in on the veterans. If you feel like you're not a good team, you need to sell to upper management that you're rebuilding for the future, so you add a lot of draft picks, right? That's like the New York Jets. The New York Jets are a bad football team, so they got to sell something. Like, oh, look at all these draft picks we got. That's great. You got 50% chances of getting a good, solid player. You traded away 2 stars in Gardner and Quinton Williams. You're going to end up back where you started, right? Just from a math perspective, right? You're going to end up nowhere. And so that's why that barbell approach, and I know I've said that about 5,000 times, is so important. And that's why I think the Cowboys outsmarted everyone with those 2 trades and their approach. The Micah Parsons trade and then the Quinton Williams trade. Again, it's the barbell. They had 1 star veteran, 1 into the barbell, not enough draft picks. So what do? They get more draft capital with the Parsons trade, but now they're a little too weighted to the draft capital side, right? So what do? They send some of that draft capital to get another quality veteran, another good player. Again, a perfectly executed barbell strategy for the Dallas Cowboys. It's what good teams do. It's what good front offices do. Great job by Dallas. Again, it's not getting credit in the media in terms of their approach, in terms of how they're handling the situation, but I think it's a wonderful job by the Cowboys leadership. All right, let's get into more of the news. This is from Nick Harris, since we're talking Quinton Williams. Talked to Quinton Williams today about this today after his first Cowboys game. Saw him revert back to his stance from last season. He said it's an Aaron White Cotton attack front thing that allows him to immediately get a field. His stance from earlier this year was more of a read and react stance that allows him to cut at a 45-degree angle easier. He said there are pros and cons to both, but after seeing his sack production immediately explode and his run defense still shine, I think this is what you'll see him be most productive in, and it sounds like it's what he's going to be asked to do here with the Cowboys. Yeah, it's a little thing, but it's one of the reasons why the Cowboys wanted to add Quinton Williams is because of his relationship with White Cotton, and White Cotton feel like he can unleash Williams. And, you talk about just a little thing like stance and alignment. It does matter. And this is where coaching matters. This is where fit matters between the coaching and the players, right? You can add really good players, star players, but if the coaches aren't using them the correct way, it's just not going to matter, right? And that's one of the things that we're seeing across the National Football League. For example, in the Green Bay Packers right now, they added Micah Parsons partially to unleash their veteran edge rusher, Rashawn Gary, who's been there for a long time, right? They felt like Gary was a good player. He just needed another guy to pair with. The problem is Gary was, prior to Parsons going to Green Bay, was sort of the pass rusher. They'd move all over the field and put him in a bunch of different situations. But now that Parsons is that guy, Gary is kind of stuck just doing ordinary run-of-the-mill edge rushing, which he frankly is not elite at. So now the Packers are kind of stuck, right? They can't have two chess pieces they move around because someone's going to actually line up and play defensive end. And so they're in a tough situation and they have to figure that out, right? And that's not uncommon across the National Football League. But the reality is, and it's so true, when you add players or frankly make any sort of roster changes whatsoever, the fit with your strategy and coaching and technique has to really align. And this is one of the things I think Bill Belichick, and I know I mentioned the Patriots dynasty before already, but they were so good at this, bringing in players and just putting them only in positions to be successful, especially veteran players. They're like, listen, man, let's say you're a really good press corner. We're only going to have you press people. Even if you only play 10 snaps a game, that's fine. But we're just going to have you press people. And that's how we're going to roll. And it just was really smart by Belichick. Now, it only works if you got a team set up to win now. If you're trying to rebuild a roster from scratch, you don't have a core good roster, that approach doesn't work. The Patriots obviously had an outstanding roster in Tom Brady, so they could get away with a lot. But the reality is, when it comes to adding players, certainly veterans for sure, you need to make sure there's a right fit in how you're going to use them and how the position coaches and the coordinators want to unleash them. So far, so good when it comes to Quinton Williams in Dallas. Obviously, we'll have to see what he does going forward. But the fact that they, the White Con, obviously that relationship with Williams and the way he wants to use him aligns him with more of what the Cowboys need. Again, it's a good marriage of scheme. It's a good marriage of talent. It's a good marriage of personnel fit. It's the little things that matter with some of these additions. It's one of the reasons why when the 49ers traded for Christian McCaffrey, a lot of people were like, man, that feels like a lot the 49ers gave up. I don't know if you guys remember that from a few years ago, but McCaffrey fit everything that Shanahan would ever want in a running back, and they have just unleashed him ever since with the San Francisco 49ers. So it's not necessarily about how good they look on paper. It's not necessarily about how productive they are. It's how good the players fit into what the acquiring team is going to use them for, especially if it's, the stylistically, whether it's alignment, whether it's X's and O's, or whether it's personnel groupings. All that has to align for things to work well. And so far, it looks like Quinton Williams is set up for success in Dallas, at least more so than he was this season with the New York Jets. All right, let's pull up this next report here, courtesy of Nick Harris, who's a great follow, by the way. If you're looking for a good person to follow on X for Cowboys news, I highly recommend Harris. The Cowboys have listed defensive end Jadeveon Clowney as questionable with a shoulder neck injury. Depth O-lineman Akeem Adeniji is also questionable with an illness. Quarterback Dak Prescott and the rest of the roster are off the injury report and will play Sunday versus Philadelphia. Obviously, that doesn't include people currently on IR or physically unable to perform, which would be folks like Trayvon Diggs, Sanborn, and of course Butler at corner. But for the people that are activated on the roster, it seems the injuries are relatively minor, which is obviously a good thing. The Cowboys have dealt with their fair share, of course, over the course of the season. So having a little bit of a reprieve as they enter into just a brutal stretch of their schedule is nice. I give the schedule makers a little bit of credit when it comes to the Cowboys, because they set them up almost for failure when they would have Monday night game, Sunday game, Thanksgiving game, and then Thursday game. Just a 4-game gauntlet there. But at least they gave them the bye right before. So, allowed them to get a little healthier before they went into the stretch. And they seem, relatively healthy. Obviously, the Clowney injury is definitely something to keep an eye on. But it does speak to the fact that sometimes, just getting healthier makes a difference. And I understand it was the Raiders. I'll have to see what the Cowboys do going forward. But you could tell against the Broncos and against the Arizona Cardinals, especially namely at the safety position, when you're running out third stringers and emergency safeties and stuff, there's just very little you can do, right? The talent deficiencies. I mean, you had Triqueze Bridges playing essentially every snap against the Denver Broncos, and Sean Payton mercilessly attacked them. And there's nothing the Cowboys could do. They tried cover 2, cover 3 man. It just was an attack on Bridges, and he played his butt off. But when you have injuries and talent deficiencies, at a certain point, you're just like, it's just tough, right? There's just only so much you can do. And listen, sometimes there are some injuries you can survive. You got a young guy that steps up and has a great game. I remember Butler against Washington last year. You get a surprise performance. You're like, wow, didn't see that coming. But those are the exceptions. Those aren't the rules, right? And we all understand that. We saw that last year when you had guys like Booth and at times OEREA playing a lot of football. Even though I thought he did okay in some instances, he would just have some plays and some busts where you're just like, listen, man, he's not a starting corner in the NFL. Not even close. He's a special teamer that has to play 60 snaps a game due to injuries. And every team goes through injuries. It's not an excuse. But one of the reasons that I think a lot of times you look at a team's stats and like, why did their defense get better or their offense get better or defense get worse or offense gets worse? Guys, sometimes it's just health. You know, the Ravens started this year 1-5, and they played some good teams to start the year, but they were decimated with injuries. Obviously, Lamar Jackson was out. They had some offensive line injuries, but their defense was just eviscerated. And then they got healthy, and suddenly they won 4 in a row, right? And obviously, that's sort of a theme that people don't really want to talk about too much because it just isn't good TV. It's not a good talking point for, like, you know, yeah, these guys, they're playing their backups right now, and that's just a tough situation to be in, right? And we all understand it is. All right, the Cowboys, for example, went up to the New York Jets and were devastated on offense with injuries, and they got a win. But the reality is, if they had to play, 6 games like that, they would have lost probably 4 or 5 of those games, right? That's just the way it is in the NFL, right? If you're devastated by injuries, it gets really tough. So the Cowboys getting healthier, obviously it's no guarantee of success, but it just makes things look a lot cleaner, makes things a lot crisper, allows you to be more multiple, and I think it allows you to play better, obviously. And I think one of the things that's taken for granted, not that they were injury-proof, because no team is in 2021 or 2022 or 2023, but really in 2022, I look at that team and like, that was obviously Dak Prescott missed time, but by the end of the season, that was a team that was healthy enough to win a championship. Because that can derail a good team too, obviously. You can be a good team and have a lot of injuries, and it just derails your opportunity to win a Super Bowl. And that's why I look back at that team like, man, I mean, they were a healthy unit. 2019 comes to mind as a team. Man, relatively healthy unit, Same thing with 16, same thing with 14, right? Obviously, every team has injuries. There's no team that isn't. But they were healthy enough all of those years to do something special. And when you have those chances, you got to take advantage of them. This year hasn't been the case, right? They're getting healthy now, but I mean, listen, you're 4-5-1. So you would need a miracle finish to sneak into the playoffs, basically. And obviously, everyone knows the Cowboys are in a rebuilding year. So if they sneak in, fantastic. But that's not obviously the long-term goal here for Dallas. But there are teams that it was their year to go all in and try and win a championship or get into the postseason, and just injuries derail it, right? That's why you got to use the barbell approach. I go back to my initial strategy there. If you go all in and let's say we're going to go hyper-focus on veterans, well, what happens when you have a lot of injuries? Look at Washington. They went all in this year, all in. They got a lot of injuries, quarterbacks beat up, and suddenly their season's over, and they look really bad, right? And I think Washington's a good team, talent-wise, when healthy, but they're just beat up. Right? That's just how it works in the NFL sometimes. The Cowboys were like that last year, obviously. So it's just one of those things. That's why you need that barbell approach. You can't ever go all into one extreme or the other. And that's why the Quinton Williams and Micah Parsons trade, again, were really good for the Cowboys. And that's why I think they outsmarted people. They outsmarted these so-called experts making those deals because they understood innately, and I think part of it was because they lived through it in 2024, okay, we can't be too heavy on the veterans, but we also can't be too heavy on the rookies. We need that balance, and they've got it right now, which again speaks to good leadership, good front office decision making. All right, let's get into this next report. This is kind of a lengthy one from Patrick Walker, but I thought it was interesting talking about Kevontae Turpin, kind of a forgotten man for a Cowboys offense that's had a really good season. For Cowboys fans wondering about Kevontae Turpin in the offense, I asked Brian Schottenheimer about Turpin's impact on offense suffering a downturn post-injury, and if that's due to the Cowboys still trying to work him back in, or taking what the defense gives, etc., as well as Dallas's plan for getting Turpin more involved. And this is what Schottenheimer said. The question's fair. I think the injury did have a little setback for Turpin for us, but it's not just that. I mean, his ability to affect the game isn't always by getting the ball in his hands. Some of the things that he does getting open and taking pressure off of people because of his speed is very impactful. But he's a guy that we definitely, when you look at, we know he can help us make plays and create explosive plays, and that's what he does. I thought last week he played his most snaps at receiver. I think it was over 30, 35, something like that. But I also think you can speak to the fact that we got 2 elite receivers that take a lot of the balls. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what Ryan Flanoy is doing. I mean, Flo is a guy that we're really excited about as well. I don't think it's anything I worry about, but I will say over the bye, we definitely said, okay, there's a guy by the name of Turpin that we'd like to get more involved. And it'd be a great week to have it happen because of the Eagles' defense. It doesn't give up a lot of explosives, but this guy has the ability to create a lot of explosives. And Shadi here perfectly demonstrates what I've referred to often as the one ball problem. And there's only one football. And I originally coined it, or I stole it from someone, I forget. I'll take credit for it until I remember who I stole it from. It's a basketball question, right? There's only one basketball, right? So you can't have 5 scorers on the team. If you have 5 scorers, 5 ball handlers, 5 point guards, your offense is going to stink, obviously. Everyone's got to have a role. Football's like that too offensively. There's only one football. Right, so Javonte Williams is running well. So he's going to get, 20 carries, 20 touches a game. Okay, Ferguson's going to get his 4 to 6, as the check down red zone option. Okay, then you've got CeeDee Lamb and obviously George Pickens. So they're going to get, ideally, between the two of them, close to 20 targets. Hopefully, maybe even a little bit more, depending how teams are playing them. So you just quickly ran through the numbers. You're up to 45, 50 snaps. You factor in a few scrambles, maybe a sack or two, maybe a short yardage handoff to Lipke, a play action boot to Brevin Spanford or something to that, and suddenly you're up to 60 snaps. Okay, so that's almost the entire game. So let's say it's still competitive at that point. Okay, then it's sort of a few balls to Flanoy, and then you've got 3 touches to Turpin, 3 targets to Turpin left over. Right, there's just not a lot of snaps. And that's not counting, running back to Malik Davis, getting a few carries to spell a guy like Javonte Williams either. So there's only so many snaps. There's only so many footballs that go around. There's one, right? There's only one, one ball at a time. There's only one person who can have the ball thrown at him or handed to him on a given play. And with that one ball problem means there's going to be an odd man out. And right now that's Turpin. And listen, I don't necessarily hate that because to me, he was always the weapon X guy. If he can be involved in the offense, that's great. But the reality is Pickens is playing great. Lamb is playing well. They're running the football well. Ferguson has his role. They've got Lipke, Brevin Spanford, Malik Davis as a running back too, filling certain niches in the offense right now as well. So you look around and you're like, okay, we've got, 80% of our offense, 90% of offense just by default covered. Listen, if Turpin works out, if he gets the advantages, if he gets the opportunities, we'll take it. But the reality is, if the threat of Turpin is an impact enough to help other guys, like Shadi kind of mentioned there, then that's good enough. And obviously, I was excited about him coming into the season. I thought he had a pretty good start to the year as sort of a weapon X, and I think he can still be that for the Dallas Cowboys. But I do think Shadi's on to something here. Listen, if you got a hot hand in Pickens and Lamb, Williams running well, right? Flanoy doing some key things as a wide receiver 3, Ferguson doing his thing. Are you going to take targets away, balls away from those guys? I wouldn't. Now, listen, Turpin's always there. You want to keep him integrated, keep him involved. I like the idea of 1 target or 2 targets a game minimum. He had a drop pass against the Raiders. It was a poor throw, but he did have a drop pass. And he has had his moments, had a few nice plays over the course of the season. But the reality is there's only one football to go around. And when people are playing well, there's always going to be an odd man out. All right, this next report is courtesy of Alex Hawley, I guess, courtesy of Fox 29, which I think is in Philadelphia. It's a local Fox affiliate in Philadelphia. And this is just an image here of a screen of, I guess, at an elementary school. And I guess it was in Camden, New Jersey or Philadelphia. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but obviously very close to Philadelphia. And what they did in the school, instead of teaching the kids how to read, write, or do things that actually help them in life, they put pictures of Dallas Cowboys on, I guess, punching bags, and they had the kids walk around, punch, CeeDee Lamb or Dak Prescott or whoever in the face, and video it and film it, and thought it was a great idea. So I lived in Baltimore for a few years, and Baltimore's not Philadelphia, and I'm not trying to pick on Baltimore so much, but it's not exactly a secret that both Baltimore and Philadelphia have horrific educational systems. They just do. Right. I think at one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but it was when I was there, that Baltimore didn't have a single, not one high school student that was reading, and in the public schools, that was reading or doing math at their grade level. Not a single one, which is sort of like statistically anomalous. Should not happen, of course. Now, how does that happen? How do you have that in a city? There's obviously a million reasons. But if you take a step back, I think this image just speaks to a lot of problems that happen in certain cities and certain mentalities, where why are we doing this with kids? Listen, it's one thing if you want to, have a boo the Dallas Cowboys, you do it in an auditorium, or in homeroom or whatever. Like, hey, the Eagles play the Cowboys, boo. Yeah, whatever. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that at all. But what are we doing here? We're supposed to be teaching kids, We're supposed to be educating kids. We're supposed to, if anything, we're supposed to teach them sportsmanship and how to carry themselves as hopefully functioning mature adults. And this is my problem with the Eagles. And this is my problem with Philadelphia as a city, because they encourage this. Now, I think this actually happened in Camden, New Jersey, but still, the point applies. This is the fan base of the Philadelphia Eagles, I think, is the worst in sports because they like this. They like the fact that their fans generally are not, I hate to use this term, but they're very low class. They don't care about the game itself. They're totally disrespectful. They're the worst in sports by far. You listen to Giants fans, listen to Washington Commanders fans. Everyone hates Eagles fans. I have nothing but respect for Giants fans and Washington fans. Every interaction with all of them has been fantastic. Every single time. A+. Obviously rivals, but A+. The Eagles are the worst. To a man. And this is why. It is inbred in their culture of who they want their fans to be, that they're having kids punch grown men's pictures in school instead of learning how to read or write. You talk about problems in society and you talk about how can we fix the ills. People talk about teachers are underpaid or education system is broken, and I'm not an expert in it, and I'm no doubt that it probably is. But when I look at pictures like this, I'm like, maybe part of the problem is what's going on in some of these localities, guys. What are we doing at this school? What are we doing? Like, this is just such an embarrassment. If I was a fan of the Eagles, if I was a resident of Pennsylvania, if I was a resident of Philadelphia or New Jersey or wherever, I would be humiliated. I would be embarrassed. But the Eagles, the Philadelphia organization, the franchise, they encourage it. They literally look at 9-year-old kids or whoever who aren't learning in school, punching the faces of adults, and they say, yes, we like that. Does that create functioning members of society? Does that create good fans? Does that create good men and women, leaders in society, the next generation? No, it doesn't. And this is a problem, right? There's been sort of an epidemic of fighting and brawling going around in NFL stadiums. You see it on social media sometimes. I put that aside a little bit. I think that's a function of people having probably 1 or 2 or 10 too many things to drink at a game. And listen, I think that's happened before in the past. There's just more cameras and social media. But this is a larger problem, right? This is a game, guys. This is a game we all love and appreciate, and it means a whole lot to me, and I know it means a whole lot to you. But it's not so important that you're teaching 8-year-olds that it's good to punch the faces of grown adults instead of learning how to read or write. This is a problem. This is a Philadelphia problem. This is a Camden, New Jersey problem, wherever this is. But this is clearly an issue. And obviously, I don't think this is something that's, nationwide. I'll say it like that. This is because my experience, again, I lived in Baltimore, which, obviously relative proximity to Philadelphia for people who know geography in that part of the world. I think it's more of a regional thing. I really do. And I think it's a problem that needs to be solved because this is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. This is kids, for God's sakes, right? It'd be one thing if this was happening like in high school. I'd be like, this is totally inappropriate. But for like elementary school, for like 8 or 9-year-olds, what are we doing? What are you doing, Philadelphia? Are the Eagles coming out and saying anything against it? Are they saying, we don't like this, guys, we need to sell it back? No, they encourage it. They promote it. And that's a problem. All right. That's my soapbox on that issue. All right. This was kind of a funny deal. So the Houston Texans, they claimed former Dallas Cowboy Damone Clark off of waivers when the Cowboys released Clark. Obviously, odd man out in the new linebacker rotation. But what's funny here is that they announced it with this image of Ryan Flournoy after catching a football against the Las Vegas Raiders. So a lot of people have mocked the Houston Texans, as deservedly they should be. And it speaks to an incompetence issue I think we see generally in society today, but certainly in different NFL franchises. And the little things matter. You wonder why certain franchises, always win. And even if you're, have a good roster, you don't win a championship. It doesn't, people look at this and like, well, how does this matter? Because it speaks to the level of competency you hire in your business, you hire in your organization. The marketing person or team or whoever did this is incompetent. Right? This is why you don't win championships. You have to hire good people top to bottom. I mean, this is just embarrassing. You got the wrong player. It's the wrong position. Everything about this is wrong. I have no idea how the Houston Texans, this is an NFL franchise. One of the more marquee, entities in American life. It's an NFL franchise. Billions of dollars, of course. An incredible amount of resources. And they screwed this up. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to be like, well, what does it really matter? It just speaks to why good teams always seem to be good. Why do first-class organizations always seem to win? There are teams that have the runs, their spurts, 5 years, 10 years, where just they have a great GM, they do a great job accumulating, a lot of good talented players, or they got a great coach, or they got an elite quarterback. But the reality is first-class organizations over the long term reveal themselves. And this is the opposite. I mean, and this is when you look at, well, why do certain teams always seem to struggle? Why do the Browns always seem to struggle? Because of things they don't like this. Now, this isn't the Cleveland, but because they hire incompetent people or they promote incompetent people. Why have the Texans, never done anything special? They've had good players. They've had talented teams. Why have they always seemed to fall short? They have a talented team this year. They've had 3 straight years of really talented teams. They got a great head coach, right? Obviously, C.J. Stroud is hurt right now, but they got a really good young quarterback. Why are they kind of floundering around that 9-10 win mark despite having a lot of really good things in a relatively easy division? It's because organizationally they have issues, right? Obviously, the Texans, prior to the hiring of DeMeco Ryans, had a lot of stories about, different people they promoted and fired and adjusted in the organization, a lot of strife there, right? Why did the Tennessee Titans, why are they so good with Vrabel and then things fall off immediately? Because they have organizational issues. Right? It's why are the New Orleans Saints just perennial contenders with Sean Payton, but then fall off immediately when Payton leaves? Because they have organizational issues. Say whatever you want about Jerry Jones, and there's a lot of things. But ever since he's taken over Dallas, obviously there's been blips of bad coaches and bad talent. But consistently speaking, they've been above average. Obviously, they won 3 championships, team of the 90s. But even in this century, I think they're, top 12, top 13 in wins, despite going through if you Campo, Parcells, Phillips, Garrett, McCarthy, and now Shoddy. So a bunch of coaches, a bunch of quarterbacks, right? Bunch of volatility, no championships, no special, 4-year dynasties or anything like that. Just consistent. You want a better example, look at the Baltimore Ravens. You talk about a first-class organization, they're first class as they get. Teams that win consistently are competent in everything they do, whether it's marketing, whether it's food in the cafeteria, or whether it's your general manager or coach. There's going to be blips where you have issues at key positions and you're going to have to make changes. But in the long term, competency wins. And this is exactly why the Houston Texans have struggled to win despite talent, because they promote and hire incompetent people. And I know this is kind of a funny thing. It was mocked on social media. But if this ever happened to Dallas, this would be a huge red flag. And this is the kind of stuff I look for to call out, okay? Because if you have this kind of incompetence in your organization, you will never be successful. What's the old saying? You are only as strong as your weakest link. You are only as good as your last hire. You're only as talented as your least talented employee. However you want to describe it, as all the great business leaders have. This is really important for organizational success. The Houston Texans fail it. This is a cautionary tale for the rest of the NFL, including the Dallas Cowboys. All right. 2 very different kind of stories here today. Just shaking things up a little bit on a Saturday, guys. Shaking things up. All right, let's get back to Cowboy-specific stuff, as I'm sure a lot of you guys may prefer. Joseph Hoyt reports, our first time talking with Matt Eberflus in a while. He offered his condolences to Marshawn Nealon's family. He also gave credit to Brian Schottenheimer for guiding them through the last tough couple weeks. His leadership and grace in that moment was outstanding. Yeah, I like circling back to this because one of the things when it comes to making the right hires, and I think it's sort of a theme over the past 2 stories, and this is kind of why I wanted to go those 3 stories sort of back to back to back, because it speaks to the element of why hiring the right people and promoting the right things culturally matters, right? Things matter. Hey, why do these Philadelphia area schools punching Dallas Cowboys, why does that really matter? Because in the long run, you're promoting in those schools, in those cultures, the leaders, the adults. I'm not blaming the kids, of course. I'm blaming the leaders, the adults there. They're the wrong people for those positions, right? They're promoting the wrong things. They're the wrong people. They should not be leading those schools, should not be leading those areas, right? That's just a fact. We all know that, right? Looking at that evidence, they should not be. They're failing in their job. How about the Houston Texans? They're hiring low-level people. Their marketing team shouldn't be there, incompetent. That's a problem. The Dallas Cowboys hired Schottenheimer. And there's a lot of questions about Schotty long-term. There's a lot of questions about the man on the screen right now, Matt Eberflus. But the reality is making the right hire, because leadership matters. Decision-making matters. And you have to constantly evaluate it. And right now with Shoddy, he looks to be the right hire in every facet. Listen, sometimes it's not just about wins and losses. You can be a good coach, have a really good strategy, and go 5-12. You can. It's happened. I mean, Jimmy Johnson went 1-15. He went 7-9. Right? I mean, he's obviously a great coach. Tom Landry, 0-11-1, and to start his career in 3-13 to finish. one of the greatest coaches of all time. So again, you can be a great coach and have a bad season. You can be a great coach and have bad seasons. It's going to happen to you eventually. Bill Parcells, went 3-12-1 his first season, went 6-10 in 2024 in Dallas, and never won a playoff game with the Cowboys, right? And again, he's a Hall of Fame coach. So the reality is you can be a good coach and a good, in terms of your role and not have a lot of wins and loss of success, or at least have some limits there, because obviously there's some factors you don't control. But leadership matters, culture matters, and competence matters. We saw the lack of leadership talking about the Philadelphia area schools. We saw the lack of competence with the Houston Texans and their issues with the marketing department there. What do we see with Shadi specifically? Neither of those things. Competence. We saw leadership. We saw stepping up to the plate. Again, I don't know in the long term what Shadi will look like in terms of being the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys in wins and losses. But just in the data points, when you compare and contrast to other elements we see with other, areas, other franchises, Shadi demonstrates. Now listen, and I got the other guy here on the screen too as a guy who's been attacked a little bit, some concerns about competence, and that's something that's going to have to be addressed if Eberflus is the guy going forward or not. Obviously a position of debate. But when you look at just Shadi, the leader of the Cowboys, the key hire they made this offseason, for sure, what does he have? Great leadership, check. Competence, check. Those two things by itself are really, really important. If you have those two things, you can solve a lot of problems. The Houston Texans, organizationally, now I think they have a great coach, but I'm just talking from an organizational perspective, showed they're not very competent, if we're being honest, right? And that matters. We saw the thing with the schools, right? In the Philadelphia area schools, that's a leadership problem, and that matters, right? You need to have good leadership. You need to have good competence. And what we saw from Eberflus here in his comments about Shadi and what we've seen from Shadi over the past few weeks is he's got both competency and leadership skills. Really important for the Cowboys going forward. All right, let's get into the comments. All right, this is from Chris Oldham. He writes, Nick, great point about nastiness being about nastiness factor being a necessity for O-line. I believe our current personnel do have it except one, Steele. He's more of a technician than a mauler, which shows in run blocking excellence, but is a deficiency in pass blocking where you have a cat fight in a moving phone booth. He'll be a prime candidate for a June 1st cut, in my opinion. Well, I certainly agree with the last sentence there. For sure, I think one of the things when it comes to Terrence Steele is just I don't think it's more of a mentality thing with Steele, just my personal opinion. I think it's just his athletic skill set favors run blocking versus pass blocking. Listen, that happens. I mean, that's not uncommon. It just is a situation with Steele, and if you're going to be paid that much money and your team's going to get salary cap relief, you're just a prime candidate anyway. If you got a guy waiting in the wings like Nathan Thomas in this case, it just seems likely for Terrence Steele to be a June 1st cut right there. And I don't think Steele's a bad player. I don't think he's a guy that stinks by any means. I think he's a competent starter. I just think based on what his cap hit will be and how much cap space it could open up and potentially get other players, it just makes sense to move on. Again, if he was costing $1 million a year, everyone would be like, great, fine. He's doing amazing, right? So the context of what he gets paid matters. All right, this next comment is from Dino LaCha. I think you told me how to pronounce it. If I didn't pronounce it correctly, again, I apologize. But he writes, they keep defining Dak's legacy. Oh, it's the playoffs when they have 3 straight 12-win seasons. Oh, it's the next 3 regular season games when they have 4 wins with 7 games to play. Keep moving the goalposts just to fit the Dak and Cowboys hate for ratings. Ridiculous narrative masses, faux insightful sports. Fact that really the media hate machine towards anything Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, I've called it the cowboy hater industrial complex. It's hilarious, the narrative with Dak Prescott, right? Dak Prescott has played 355 legacy-defining games in his NFL career at this point, and he's only played 140 total games, right? There's been so many legacy-defining moments for Dak Prescott, and it's been so weird. They didn't do this with Tony Romo, and I think part of it because there was a gap between Aikman and Romo, so it became sort of a different thing stylistically in terms of how they treated Romo. But the fact that it went from Romo to Prescott, I mean, they've just been every single year. There's been a legacy moment. This is a defining moment for Prescott, and it's hilarious. This is a team obviously not set up to win a championship this year, and you've got people on TV saying the next 3 games define his legacy. Come on, that's hilarious. All right, Ronald Alexander 5517 writes, I'm LMBAO over this kerfuffle with Lamb and Pickens. Maybe it's the times we live in, but I suggest people read North Dallas 40 for a little perspective. Obviously, that's a novel. You want a great book? Read Landry's Boys. That's a sort of a historical book talking heavily about that 1960s era. It is a great read. A lot of great stories in that one. Pete Gent, obviously, North Dallas 40. He has a big part in that one as well. So if you want to check that one out, I highly recommend Landry's Boys. Big fan of that book. But anyway, that said, I've been comparing Lamb and Pickens to other duos in the history of the NFL that I've experienced, and the duo that comes to me is Swan and Stallworth. Lamb reminds me of Swan on how graceful they both run their routes, catchability, and Pickens, like Stallworth, is just a beast with run after catch. The reason I thought about it when you are thinking about the history of the franchise and talking about in the offseason, I bet the commenters could write the content talking about it. Yeah, it'd be interesting to do a sort of historical parallel between, who do George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb sort of align with. Stallworth and Swan certainly is an interesting duo there. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. That one's interesting. I'll have to do a deep dive into that one. I don't have an answer for you today, but certainly is a good food for thought. The real Daryl 282 writes, as long as the Cowboys consistently get that push up the middle from their DTs, it will make everybody else's job on defense much easier. Agree 100%, especially now that it's become a position of strength, right? At any time you have a major area that's deficient, like defensive tackle was, and you turn it into a position of strength in a matter of a few months, things are just going to look better, right? It's one of those things where, like when the Cowboys traded for Amari Cooper in 2018, where wide receiver was like, not looking so good, and suddenly you got Amari Cooper, and you're like, hey, this bunch seems like a much better group, right? That things can have a compounding effect, and I think the continued push with Quinton Williams, obviously Kenny Clark, Oso Digizua getting better opportunities to do their thing, I think will be good for this defense. I think edge rusher is still a problem outside of Ezeraku. Safety play is still meh at best. Linebacker core, a lot of volatility there, overshown the question mark returning from injury. Corners are young, so there's still a lot of flaws and a lot of questions, but I think the defense is mightily improved, at least from a structure and talent perspective too, with the addition of Quinton Williams. Stephen Van Over writes, agree with Nick, if your legacy is based on a 3-game stretch of the regular season, then you don't have much of a legacy. That is true. There are a few exceptions, I.e. Archie Manning, but in NFL, you make your legacy in the postseason. Yeah, it's one of those things. Like people forget Eli Manning was a below average quarterback most of his career, statistically speaking. And, he had his moments, but he had 2 great championship runs, essentially. That was really on the back of the defense, but he was clutch. And everyone just sort of has this memory of Eli Manning being just, wow, he was really good. Is he a Hall of Famer? I'm like, listen, did you watch Manning? Now, I thought he was a good quarterback. I thought he was a competent quarterback. But Romo was clearly better than Eli Manning. So was Dak Prescott in terms of regular season performance. But Eli Manning has 2 championship runs, so he gets the bumped up legacy. That's how it works. Same reason why Terry Bradshaw, for example, is elevated higher in a lot of people's minds than Staubach, for example, right? Very similar dynamic. 4 versus 2. It's a rings-based business. That's the way it's always been. Like it or not, that's just the way it is. All right, this next comment is from Michelle Castilleja. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, please correct me. As you can probably tell, I am terrible with pronunciations. Writes, don't like your take on Dak. I think this is probably alluding to the fact I said Dak is good, not great. I just think that's fair, right? I mean, do you think Dak Prescott is in the category of Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes? I don't think so. Or Lamar Jackson. Now, I do think Prescott has had seasons where he's been in the caliber of those guys, but I think snap in, snap out, game in, game out, year in, year out, I think they're better. That's not a knock on Dak, right? That's not like, oh my goodness, Prescott's the worst quarterback of all time, but I think that's like saying, listen, Danny White's good, but Roger Staubach was better, right? It's one of those kind of deals. There's nothing that's saying that. It's not a dig against Danny White. It's just saying, hey, Staubach was better, right? It's, I think that's just a fair comparison to make. Now, you can make an argument that maybe Prescott should be given more positive feedback from the media, and I think that's probably fair, but I don't think he's a top 3, top 5 guy. Now, it's just my opinion. You may disagree, and that's perfectly fair. WT3 Work writes, David Mulligeta is not GP's agent. His agent is Trayvon Smith. They do work at the same agency. Yeah, I doubt that GP's agent wants David Mulligeta just stealing away his client's big payday, thus getting credit for it. The media has somehow incorrectly tied David Mulligeta to GP just because he is represented by his agency. I didn't know that. Can we confirm that? I thought Mulligeta was sort of the owner, operator, kind of head guy in charge, CEO of that agency. And while there may be, individual agents that are the day-to-day representatives, it kind of begins and ends with Mulligeta. That was sort of my understanding, but I could be wrong. So if I am wrong, please correct me on that. But I thought Mulligeta was sort of, the owner, leader of that agency. The way, and this probably may not be the best comparison, but the way like a scout technically works for Jerry Jones, for example. the way, maybe Trayvon Smith works for David Mulligeta. The interaction may, preliminary minor work maybe between, a lower level Cowboys employee and Smith, but the big negotiation would be from the Joneses and Mulligeta. That was sort of my take on it. But if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'll admit I'm not an expert on George Pickens's how he's represented and the structure of his team there. Tony McCain, 3525, writes, Butler is NFI and should not count as one of the 8 IR callbacks. Great point. That's why I love you guys fact-checking me. 100% correct. Butler is designated such that way he does not count against one of their limited 8 IR callbacks to the active roster. So that's a phenomenal point. Thank you for the fact-check, guys. Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate it. Again, that's why I like the comments, keeping me honest. And listen, if I say something wrong, please correct me. Like I do my best to get my facts straight, but there's a lot of times I'm going to make mistakes. So please correct me when I get things incorrect. Terry Crow 2066 writes, these Dak haters in the comments. Just look at the stats and the data. Just listen to how well he is spoken of by all of his coaches and by all of his teammates. Put Dak on the Eagles 3 years ago, and he has 3 Super Bowl rings in my honest opinion. Listen, obviously, Prescott's very, very good. I think he's very good, not great. I've said that about 5 million times. I don't know how many times I have to keep saying it. But listen, I do think the fact that he's so highly regarded, he is a leader, A-plus leader, for sure. I think he's the best quarterback leader in the NFL right now. He's a veteran guy, operates well in the structure of Shoddy's offense. He's done good things no matter the offensive coordinator. Linehan, Moore, McCarthy, Shoddy Adams now. So he is a very good quarterback. And I do think one thing you can say for sure about Prescott, he's not a system guy. There are some quarterbacks that have that sort of connotation of being a system guy. That's not Prescott at all. He's proven that he's not. He's proven he's a great leader. He's proven he can score points. I just think he just because and again, it goes back to being a rings business, because he doesn't have that that championship moment. That there's always going to be that caveat against him. Even a guy like Burrow, for example, or even Josh Allen, don't have championships. They have those moments deep in postseason games, conference championship games. Burrow was a Super Bowl that I think edged them in front of Dak Prescott slightly. Not that that's Prescott's fault necessarily. It's just the way it works in the NFL. And obviously guys like Mahomes that have the championships are going to be well ahead of him. Matthew Stafford, of course, with the championship. So I think Prescott is very good, not great. But I do agree. The people that hate on Dak are just foolish at this point. All right, this next comment is from Carmick Patina. I'm right there with you on Schrager and Clark. We get a win on Sunday. Keep up the great work on your channel. Thank you for the comment and the kind words. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Pete Schrager. I'm not a fan of either Schrager and Clark. Like when they had their little debate or kerfuffle between the two, it's one of those things where I'm just rooting for both of them to lose. Schrager's a great reporter, but a terrible commentator. Ryan Clark is a guy who's a former player who's got some unique insights, but he's a jerk about it 99% of the time, and a lot of times his insights are just being negative to be negative. So both of them kind of stink, in my honest opinion. Randy9441 writes, love the moves being made on defense. The rest of the season needs to be about talent evaluation, figuring out who can play and in which situations they excel in moving forward. Keep up the good work, Nick. Great content. Thank you so much for the nice words, Randy. I appreciate that. And I agree with your sentiment. There's so much youth, right? What role does Reddy Stewart have going forward? What role can Shavon Revel play? What role does Kalen Carson have? Right, linebackers, Logan Wilson's role, Leah Fowles' role, Shamar James's role. Well, how's that going to work? What's the defensive tackle rotation going to be like? Is it worth even considering bringing back Sam Williams or Dante Fowler? James Houston has another year left on his deal. What's his role going to be, right? There's a lot of things the Cowboys have to figure out, right? Obviously, Jay Toya, young 7th-round pick, kind of reserve defensive tackle. Is he just going to be completely relegated, or is there things you like about him, right? There's a lot of questions defensively where you're trying to figure out who can play where and how. Even on offense, who's your wide receiver 3? Is it Flournoy? Who's your second tight end? Is it Brevin Spann-Ford? Can Jaden Blue actually play running back in the NFL? Will he develop, right? There are questions. They're not nearly as pressing on offense as they are on defense, but there's a lot of questions that have to be evaluated the second half of the season, and that should be the priority. Obviously want to win and want to play well, but if the sacrifice for winning is going into 2026 with still a lot of these questions unanswered, that's a problem. And that's why I appreciate what Eberflus and the Cowboys have done at the defensive back position by giving Carson starting opportunities and benching Kyer Elam. Giving Kyer Elam more playing time doesn't solve anything for the future, and it may not even help you in the present either, right? But getting Revel opportunities is good. Getting Kalen Carson a lot of opportunities is good. Giving Reddy Stewart continued opportunities is good. right? Mixing in linebackers, still giving Shamar James some plays, right? Still giving Leofau a lot of plays, right? Because these guys have had their moments. Give them opportunities. See what role they're going to be in. That's so important. You bring up a great point here. That should be the main focus. And if they stick to that focus while also trying to play well, I think they'll be set up very nicely for the future. PA Longhorn 421. I'm curious. Obviously, you live in Pennsylvania. Are you in the Philadelphia area? I mean, do you see the same stuff that I see on? Because maybe I'm just living in a bubble because I see some really bad Eagles stuff on social media in my time living in Maryland. I was exposed to some of it. But maybe are you in that part of the state? What are your thoughts on that? I want to hear from you specifically. Maybe you got some unique on the ground insights when it comes to the Eagles and that part of the world. But anyway, he wrote, living in Pennsylvania, I watched a few Steelers games and had a good eye on George Pickens. Never thought he'd be on our team, but loved the trade after announced with his performance so far, fitting in nicely with team and organization, plus staying away from those antics Steelers fans were warning me on. I love the trade even more. All he needed was a good quarterback plus another elite wide receiver, and great point on their different game-changing skills. Yin to the yang, great content. Yeah, it's one of those things. They work well together personally. They work well together professionally, and when you have that environment, keep it. Doesn't happen a lot. Anyone who's worked in those, I talked about this yesterday, but anyone who's worked in an office with a great culture knows it's special because a lot of times it's a bad culture. And when you have two coworkers, because let's be honest, it's essentially what they are at the NFL level, that work beautifully well together on and off the field, connect emotionally, they're selfless, not selfish, which is uncommon for wide receivers. Keep that together. That's a priority. And Buddha Namaste 597 writes, salute to the channel. Lamb going to be the key to all this. He must look at GP like how it was when Cooper first came in. Coop opened up the floodgates for Lamb, and it seemed like it would work out. Keep being a team player. Yeah, I think the decision to let Amari Cooper go or trade him for very little and keep Michael Gallup on a big extension was a mistake, obviously going back to, I think, 2020 offseason prior to the 2022 season. But yeah, I agree. Cooper did come in and sort of give the opportunities for CeeDee Lamb. And by 2021, they were playing really well together, and that was a great offense, of course, that the Cowboys had that season. Disappointing end, of course, but really good offensive football team. I think the chance for Lamb and Pickens to play together and play better together is even higher than that group. But I do think that's sort of, again, Lamb learned from Amari Cooper. One of the reasons why the barbell approach. Let's end where we started, guys. The barbell approach matters. If you have a good mix of veterans and rookies, the rookies learn from the veterans, and then the cycle repeats, right? That's why the barbell approach matters. If you have a bunch of rookies, they don't learn from anybody. If you have a bunch of veterans, got nobody to teach, right? It all comes full circle, guys. That's how I started the show, and that's how I'll end it. All right, it is an interesting day of college football action, so obviously I'm sure a lot of you guys will be following that news. Kind of a weird year in college football, kind of a weird, funky year. Things have shaken out. A lot of good teams that haven't looked so good. A lot of bad teams that have or teams I didn't think were going to be good have turned out to be pretty good. So kind of an interesting year for college football, but it's a fun college football Saturday. And of course, tomorrow is game day. And I will be here tomorrow morning to get you guys ready for that and hear from your comments and get your thoughts on all things football when it comes to the Cowboys. But until then, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.